Okay. So once again, we're going to be talking about using positionality statements to embrace classroom diversity today. And I am Dr. Lindsay Vreeland. My pronouns are she, her. Y'all can call me Lindsay. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about myself, sharing my positionality statement as we talk a little bit more about what positionality statements are, what they look like, where we might include them as we go through this presentation. I'm going to turn my face off for a minute so we can focus on our slides. So today we're hopefully going to be able to understand the concept of positionality and its significance in shaping individuals' perspectives and understanding of the world. Depending on what fields you're coming from, maybe positionality is something that is sort of a new concept to you all. Or maybe it's something that you talk about a lot in your research, in your teaching. Maybe this isn't super brand new, but from especially STEM fields, I have gotten the feedback that people aren't actively talking about it. So this might be brand new information for you all. We're going to learn how to create positionality statements that authentically reflect our personnel or our identities and experiences. And that's going to contribute to a more nuanced understanding of diverse perspectives. And we're going to talk about strategies for integrating positionality statements into our courses and into our research. And I'll give some more examples of where we might want to include them and how that might help shape meaningful learning experiences for our students, but also for ourselves, because we're part of the learning community in our classrooms. While you might be facilitating and guiding a lot of the learning, um, you're also part of that community, and you are hopefully learning from your students in ways that might not be formal education, but might be learning about the ways that other people are learning or where they come from, what they believe to be important in their lives. So, what is positionality? So, positionality is essentially the way that we understand the world and approach research. And that's all going to be based on our identities and experiences. So, this is aligned with those of us that come from um, methodologies backgrounds and might talk a lot about methodologies in our research. This is aligned with standpoint theory. Um, so our social identities, our culture, our upbringing, the trauma that we've experienced, the education, whether it's formal education or generational knowledge, the careers that we have, all of that is going to impact our positionality and how we view the world and how we view our space in it. And our identities are intersecting. If you've attended any of the FACE workshops where they're talking about cultural competency, there's a lot of discussion of intersectionality and intersecting identities. And so this idea that we're not only walking to a space with our gender, we also have sexuality, we also have our educational background, we have our race or ethnicity, we have our religious beliefs. All of those things are existing at the same time. And that tug and pull can be complicated. But there are spaces where we might be focusing or more aware of one part of our identity than others. And so this can include privilege and oppression, especially if we're talking about, gender and sexuality and race and socioeconomic class. But that's not really the focus. It's thinking about all of these experiences that we're coming with and all these identities that we're holding and how that influences the way that we view research or our disciplines, or even our students. What do we think we understand about them? What do we understand about them? Um, how do we feel about the people that are in our classes as a larger group or as individuals? So thinking about positionality and thinking about the things that we hold to be important and how they influence the way that we view the world, this is actively in conflict, excuse me, with objectivity. So while especially in the writing classroom, which, as I said, I um, come from teaching a lot. In that space, we talk about writing in an objective voice, but students can never really be fully objective. We can never really be fully objective. So while research has been presented as like we need to be objective, we need to be able to zoom out and look at the things that we're studying with clean eyes, that's not going to happen. We're always going to have influences and biases and moments of authority over the things that we're looking at that are going to impact the way that we view what we're doing in every space. So this myth of objectivity has really been perpetuated by this idea that, especially in Western academia, that the perspective of white cis heterosexual men um, is neutral. And so if we're coming in and looking at research and focusing on um, a survey, and we notice that we're asking questions that have to do with race, but we're only asking a certain group of people that identify with a particular race or ethnicity. Um, there might be people that have conflict with that. This idea that we shouldn't be focusing on particular parts of our identities, or that you're getting too nitpicky or whatever. So this is all just to say that we have a lens. We're constantly going to be viewing things through a lens, whether it's like this formal theoretical framework of, queer theory, or if it's just that you are a queer person and you're viewing the world through those experiences and the identity that you have. Um, so it's not a bad thing to have these lenses, but we need to be aware that this is what we're carrying with us. And so, again, it could be a form of bias, but it could also be this moment of having authority in different spaces and having insight that other people don't. And it's just important for us to be aware of that and for students to be aware of uh, these lenses that they're carrying also. So we use positionality statements in particular to claim and describe our positionality. We're acknowledging our bias and our authority, and bias in this situation is not necessarily a bad thing. I know that there's negative connotation with bias, but there could also just be that your eye is drawn to particular things within research, within a discipline, within the content that you are teaching, because you hold that identity, or that's something that you formally researched a lot, or that you find particularly interesting because it's related to uh, someone or something that is important to you. And positionality statements are an opportunity for us to recognize the intersectional nature of our experiences and identities and the knowledge that we have that influence our opinion. So we use these as educators, as scholars, as learners. Um, and you'll see forms of these in different people's like website bios. Um, we can use them in our syllabus. We can use them when we're talking about particular topics to clarify whether you're an outsider or insider when you're talking about that topic. So for instance, when I am talking to my students in my gender and sexuality courses and talking about trans identities, I make sure that they understand that I am an outsider, that I am cisgender. I don't have those lived experiences, but I do have connections to trans people. I do have the research background and the general interest in that topic. So I clarify that that's not something that I have direct experience with, like as an individual. Um, that's not an identity that I hold, but I still have that knowledge, and that creates a space for students to um, understand, but also if they disagree with me, there's space for us to have those conversations. Um, we also use them to identify our expertise, so whether that's professional or lived, and we can identify privilege with using these positionality statements also. And you might see in different fields, especially in works that are published through journals, positionality statements are becoming more and more popular. It's not just an author bio, it's a positionality statement to identify uh, who they are, why they're doing the things that they're doing, what their background is. And this is a great practice because it can help us uh, be reflective and think about uh, how did we get to this research, or how did we get to this space. um, it's a good way for us to create inclusive learning environments, and to share a little bit about ourselves with our students. Maybe that's something that we have identities or backgrounds or experiences that they can relate to, and they can see that, oh yeah, like my previous experiences in the anthropology classroom was with people who look or think like this. This professor looks or thinks differently, has this socioeconomic background that's similar to mine. Maybe me taking up space in this classroom isn't so abnormal. Maybe there's a connection here, or a way for me to feel supported. Um, this is a great way for us to value diverse perspectives and voices, especially if we're encouraging our students to write positionality statements. We can demonstrate that identities matter, that we're holding identities, and it matters um, who's involved in the discipline, who's taking up space in the classroom, and acknowledging the privilege that you have in particular spaces. And this is also I guess I kind of already said this. This is a great way for us to relate to others through our shared experiences, and um, recognize that lived experiences have a lot of value. While it does matter that you have the degree that you have to get to the space that you are in to teach, you also have a lot of lived experiences that are going to give you insight and are going to only add to you as an individual, as an educator, as a researcher, and make you more interesting, and uh, make you a better um, researcher and scholar and teacher. And I think that acknowledging this is a great way to really share that with our students, and create connections. So I want to talk a little bit about how you might go about creating your own positionality statements. This information will be shared with you later, when I email you all at the end of this presentation, and I'm going to share my own positionality statement next. But before I get too much, I guess, into like how we might do this, Uh, I will say, we just finished the first week of classes. A lot of the first week of classes, like talking about syllabus and talking about course expectations and whatnot. As you go into the classroom next week, it might be a great opportunity to share more about yourself and share more about your positionality with your students. You probably already shared some stuff, right? Not just like how to contact you, but you probably also talked about like what your position is. You might have talked about your educational background, or if you are involved in any particular organizations or associations that are, relevant to what they're studying in the classroom. If you're teaching grad students, you might have talked a little bit more about your experience with grad school or the expectations that come along with MA or PhD programs. But this is a great way, like you're just getting to know your students and they're just getting to know you. And, maybe some of these students are repeat students, but talking a little bit about your positionality and who you are and what you're bringing to the classroom, especially in the first couple of weeks of class, I think is a really great way to start off uh, the semester and also give students the uh, opportunity to share more about themselves if they're feeling so emboldened. Okay, so how do we start? So for positionality statements, what makes them different than just like an author bio if you're doing something that's like a written piece of work, or just sharing like general background or an about me with your students, is that you're identifying the social identities and beliefs that you hold that are significant to what you're doing. So what you're teaching, what you're learning, um, whatever position you're holding with that you're sharing the positionality statement, wherever that is. You identify relevant experiences that you have and how they're shaping who you are, and how you approach the topics of the class. So if you became a nurse because um, your you saw a grandparent in and out of the hospital, that might be something that you would want to share with your students to create this understanding that this is why you're here. Sometimes these stories and experiences feel really vulnerable, and you don't have to share all the vulnerable stuff. You can talk generally about how you had a lot of experience with the healthcare system when you were young. You can talk generally about these experiences and these identities. You don't have to, get into the nitpicky when talking about your ethnicity, and talk about the background of all of your relatives. But we can talk generally about this stuff and acknowledge that these are the experiences and identities that we're bringing. Um, you want to consider how the field of study or higher education in general is reinforcing or challenging dominant narratives. So what are the dominant narratives in your spaces? If the expectation in the writing classroom is that you're going to have uh, a white cis het woman teaching the class, like that's what a professor looks like in the English writing classroom in a college setting, then we might want to think about what identities that we have that are aligning with that or are working against that, and share things so that students know that you're you're more than that, or that you're bringing other things into the situation, and there are spaces for people that don't uh, reinforce that dominant narrative. Um, and depending on the field that you're working into, there might be dominant narratives about people, depending on what you're studying directly. You might be talking about neurodivergence or uh, autism, And there might be dominant narratives about people that hold those identities too. And there might be some things that you want to share about yourself with if you hold those identities, or acknowledge that you have experiences that work against those dominant narratives. Even as a researcher or educator or someone who has friends and family and students that hold those identities. And then you want to identify your values and how they relate to your goals, whether it's learning or teaching. It might be class-specific goals. It might be thinking about specific assignments or research. So if you have a reason why you want them to do this big research project, talking about why that's important, what they're going to be getting out of it, and the values that you hold or you think a person who is going to be a professional in this field should have. Relating all those things back is really important. So there might be times that you're sharing different parts of your positionality with students, but these are just some sort of general ways to start to think about this. And again, we're thinking about not only who we are, but what the expectations are in the field that we're in higher education, in the workplace outside of what we're doing. What does it look like when somebody's working in healthcare, and what the expectations are? Are you reinforcing those expectations in your class, and is there a reason why? These are all just opportunities to talk about that and be personal when we're talking about that stuff. Okay. So my positionality statement, there's a lot of words, and I'm so sorry. But I think it does help to have this out on the page and recognize that my positionality statement, when in a 12-point font, doesn't look that aggressive and long. But I want to acknowledge the things that I've done in the past, in addition to the things that I'm doing currently, and how they influence the work that I'm doing right now, why I'm in this workshop right now, why I'm talking to you right now. So I am a white cis woman. I'm disabled and neurodivergent, and I'm also a stroke survivor. I'm a first generation college graduate with a PhD in English literature and a graduate certificate in gender and sexuality studies. Currently, I'm an inclusive teaching coordinator at CITL, but I've also worked as a co-coordinator, for NIU's Writers Workshop, and I've taught composition, American literature, and gender and sexuality studies courses at the college level for over a decade. I've, as a side note, something that I would also probably add, especially talking with students, is that I've taught at online universities, in person, and community colleges too. So I have a variety of sort of teaching experiences with different types of students. My research in the field of gender studies, which is not something that I'm actively doing right now, but is something that I want to continue to pursue in some ways, focuses on the role that community plays in creating healing spaces for gender-based trauma. For CITL, my research is a little bit different, and it focuses on creating inclusive environments for learners and for educators. And as a feminist learner, scholar, and educator, I recognize that academia and academic disciplines have been built on oppressive systems like white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonialism. And while I benefit from a lot of these systems, and I've been able to move through higher education and not actively see all of these systems, they haven't been glaring to me at all times. I want to make sure that I'm learning from and centering voices different than my own as an educator and researcher and an individual. So I'm bringing a lot of experiences and formal education and identities into the spaces that I am teaching or facilitating knowledge. But I also want to make sure that I'm creating space for other people to talk and share and point me into the direction of other people that talk and share and learn a little bit more about the world and higher education and inclusive teaching from diverse groups of people. So we talked a little bit about incorporating positionality statements into classes. The positionality statement that I just went over, I would probably pick and choose parts of that to share with the class, especially for when I teach gender and sexuality. I would probably include a little bit about my sexuality. I might talk a little bit about my experiences teaching and also my connections to the different topics that we're going to be covering in that class. In the writing classroom, I might talk a little bit about my history as a writer. I might talk a little bit about my history as someone who teaches writing, but also someone who had to write a dissertation, someone who focused a lot on writing poetry at one point in my career as a college student. So different aspects of my identity might be more important in specific spaces than others. I'm sure, my WGSS 101 students would love to hear about me being a poet, but it's not necessarily as important in that space as it might be in the writing classroom, or if I was teaching a creative writing class or working with a creative writing organization, student organization, that might be relevant in that space, and that might be something that I would want to share there. So when we're incorporating positionality statements specifically into our classes, as I said earlier, if you can do it at the beginning of the course within the first couple of weeks, especially as you're getting sort of into the content and thinking a little bit more about what we're going to be covering, but actually starting to cover that, that might be really helpful to identify what your perspective is and what your mindset is for the class. When we're working on qualitative and quantitative research projects, acknowledging that our positionality is going to impact the way that we're approaching our research, and that that's not necessarily a bad thing, that's just a thing. Again, it could be something that you have a little bit of bias over, or it could also be that you're an authority on this particular topic and you're bringing that into that research. When we're doing analytical thinking or critical thinking, so when I have my students do research papers or argumentative papers, I make sure that we talk about that we're looking for information that is going to confirm what we already believe. Generally speaking, we're not necessarily coming in with a clean slate about something that we've never heard about and don't have any formed opinions about. And that's okay. And if we're reading a book together and interpreting the rhetoric, we're probably, again, going to be coming in and bringing our own thoughts and experiences about that particular topic or even the language that's being used. And that might inform the way that we receive the text and that we talk about that text. And when we're approaching topics that might be challenging, so for those of us that are maybe talking more generally about identities in classrooms, for me, the conversation of interracial adoption is something that has come up in my classes, and it can be really difficult for people to criticize that, but we might have somebody in the classroom who has experienced that firsthand, and it wasn't a negative experience. So claiming those identities, claiming that positionality might be really important to us as individuals, but also to our students to understand where people are coming from, why they might be saying the things that they're saying, and also why they might not be able to budge on their opinion, especially when we're talking about different topics related to sort of hot topics that might be related to like religion or immigration. Students have really hard formed opinions about those things, and sometimes they're based off of belief systems that we're not going to be able to get them to reflect on deeply, but at least acknowledging that that's what that's rooted in creates an environment where we can understand each other a little bit more. And as I said earlier, we don't need to share everything. We need to respect students that don't want to share everything. We need students to respect us when we don't want to share everything. This Our classes aren't spaces where we have to be vulnerable all the time, or that it's going to be therapy. Sometimes it's therapeutic to share things, but that's not necessarily what we're intending to do in the classroom, right? So there are options for us to connect to a topic without being too vulnerable. So saying that I have experience with gender-based violence is going to be a way for me to identify proximity to that issue without identifying this is what happened to me, or this is what happened to my family. And it's also okay to just not share everything. Like, you don't have to acknowledge things that make you feel vulnerable, or students don't have to acknowledge everything that's going to make them feel vulnerable, that they don't feel comfortable or safe or supportive saying those things in the classroom. And I think that's one of the things about positionality statements, is that you get a lot of chance while you're creating them to think about what you want to share with other people and to really tailor it to specific audiences. I could go back and add more things that really do shape my perspective on inclusive teaching environments. But this is, as I said earlier, is going to be shared on YouTube. And I don't know that I necessarily want everybody in YouTube world to be able to access that information about me. Would I share it with you all if this wasn't recorded? Probably. And that's okay to have those boundaries and have that understanding of this is not something that I want to share exactly right now, and maybe you want to share it later. But we need to recognize that positionality statements are great, but again, it can be also a vulnerable experience. And if you don't want to be super vulnerable, that's okay. You can talk about your educational background. You can talk about your professional background. You can talk about the things that you've researched, or your experiences, what you've taught before. And all of those things are going to still relate to your positionality, but might be things that, you know, your students can Google or find on your CV, and that's still enough. So if we want our students to be able to have the opportunity to share their identities with each other and with us, there are different activities that we can do, especially as we're, again, starting off the semester and building community, or we might want to start to do this before particular subjects or assignments in our classrooms. And you know, this might be more relevant to particular types of classes or disciplines, or levels of study than others. But we can have students and ourselves fill out personal identity or social identity wheels. I'll send out information of what that is and when I email you later. But these wheels essentially give us an opportunity to identify the identities that we primarily associate with ourselves and what we think about often, and then recognize like some of these other identities that we're still holding at the same time. It's an opportunity for us to just reflect personally, and we don't have to share those things, especially as we're thinking about our place in that particular classroom. But it also is something that we might want to have students share some things with each other to create connection. We can also do mind maps, which are a visual representation of identities and experiences. Students, might want to draw things in their mind maps. They might want to write things. It gives them an opportunity to organize their thoughts and their feelings about their identities in ways that make sense for their brains, a little bit more than maybe writing an actual positionality statement. The story of your name. If students have names with meaning, mine has no meaning, really. But some people do. Some people have lovely stories about their names and where it comes from, who named them, why they like it, how it connects to culture or heritage or family, and how it's impacted them. And that's a great opportunity for students to share a little bit about themselves and to break the ice a little bit. So again, my name doesn't have meaning within the family, but I might talk about how I'm a twin, and the ultrasound, back in the 80s, ultrasounds weren't super sophisticated, and you really didn't get many when you were pregnant. And so I was incorrectly identified as being male like my brother. And so we had different names picked out. My mom was certain that I was not going to be a boy, and so that's something that was like, my name was essentially a backup name, and that's sort of important to my parents, but it doesn't really come from anything. They just like the name, and like a bunch of other people, I'm named Lindsay, and the spelling is different amongst all of us, and that is fun between Gen X and millennials. There's always a Lindsay in the room. Anna Mary, I do the same thing as an attendance conversation with warnings so they can prep what they say. And it always goes so far to create connection in the classroom. It's such a great way for people to just talk a little bit about themselves in a very low stakes way, but also, yeah, for you to associate them with something that's beyond like their major, or whether or not they commute to class or whatever. Yeah, I love that. And these are things that you can also do, um, again, second week, third week of class. We can go back and we can share a little bit more of our identities as we get to know each other a little bit more, and continue to build that community and connect with each other and practice names. Just by looking at me is an opportunity for students and also for you. I recommend if you're asking students to do this stuff, that you do it also, to acknowledge the identities and experiences that can't be gleaned from your initial presence, and to challenge the assumptions and the biases that we have about people who might look like you in that particular situation. Again, maybe not suitable for all classes, and definitely something that you want students to have a chance to reflect on, and you want to give them examples before we really get into that. We can also do entry or exit tickets, so low stakes ways to reflect on the skills or the content that is in the course and how students are connecting to it. What do they know about that thing? What's influencing their thoughts? Are they nervous about having to write a 5-page paper because they have had really bad experiences in the writing classroom in the past? this is a great way for students to share a little bit about themselves, not have to share it with everybody, create that connection with you, and start thinking about their positionality as learners in that classroom. Okay, I talked at you a lot. Let me turn on my confirm that I am in fact a human on this side of the computer. So I talked a lot, and I'm just curious what you all are thinking. If you're doing some of this stuff, it sounds like Anna Mary, you're already uh, thinking a little bit about identity and forming those connections, which in nonprofit and NGO makes sense, right? Students are coming in um, with a desire to be in that field, and it could be really, really personal, right? So I'm curious, what are we doing? What are we thinking? Yeah, Anna Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've taken a lot of these classes with you and outside of you. And so I keep taking them because I know I'm can't catch everything every time I take it. And so I try and incorporate one thing or another. And some other things I was not to sort of brag, but I guess to brag at the same time, some of the things you were saying about sort of positionality and like connecting yourself with the subject matter, I've actually done since I started teaching in 2020 because I teach four different topic areas in the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies, and I wanted the students to understand why I actually can talk on such a wide variety of things because they're like, "How are you here again? I thought you taught fundraising. How are you here again? I thought you were just management." And so I always sort of do that. And so it's just kind of interesting to be like, oh, wait, I was kind of moving into this space without even fully realizing it because now I am very intentional about it. And the name game sort of thing, I actually only really do that in one of my classes because it connects to the material really well as to why we really need to be building connection with each other. And it's helped me learn all their names, right? Which is obviously a big bonus for me. And this semester, I have 28 students that I have already had before. So I had, 28 less names to learn. And I actually had a student from last spring who emailed me after class this spring to say, I just wanted to say thank you for learning our names and learning stuff about us because when I walked into the classroom, I knew that I knew you, but I wasn't sure if you would remember me from last year. And like the fact that I called her by name when I was taking attendance before she ever said it, or identified who she was like, we just met so much and it was so appreciated. And so, which I was like, oh my gosh, thank you for telling me because, but it helps to create this like synergy in the classroom that is flows into every discussion they're moving forward. Their students are so much more engaged because they've already sort of broken their silence in the room. So
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, you've been with me for a bunch of different workshops, but I mean, it's all about inclusive teaching, and all of these things overlap in really interesting ways. And some of this stuff is intuitive. Some of the stuff you might be like, oh, this happened to me when I was a student and this was awesome. But yeah, we might be doing best practices and not really realizing why, because we're like, this feels right. So I'm so glad that your students are also recognizing that and making those connections, and that you have this like lovely little community in your classes. That's amazing.
yeah, but you have to be intentional about it because my first few years, I did not. I did not
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah. Well, and you started teaching in 2020. So also
Mhm.
like pandemic shutdown, there was a lot of moving parts during that too.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you're continuing to grow, and that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks.
Stephanie, please share. Oh, I think you're muted, Stephanie.
All right, is that better?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yay.
All right, sorry about that. I have to say the same thing is I get to know people's names, and sometimes I teach them multiple times, other times it's just once. But even if I see them in the hallway and I call them by name, a lot of times they also are amazed. I think just knowing somebody's name and not only and pronouncing it correctly and taking the time to learn how to pronounce it correctly goes a long way. I do an introduction the first day of class, whether it's in person or if it's on Yellow Dig or just something so everybody can get to know and see each person. Um, and it does really bring like a sense of community to the classroom. And I'm also very transparent, tell them about myself. And I never think to say a first generation college student because I guess I am, but it was so long ago that I never like think that that's part of my identity. um but I tell them about I just got my PhD a couple of years ago, so like my experience with school, and I just try to meet them where they're at. And I just, I've been doing now in class, I teach the OB course for nursing, and I talk about, trigger warning in the beginning of the semester. Like, we're going to talk about sensitive topics. If you have any concerns, or, I just try to be very transparent in the beginning. And like I said, get to know the students, and it seems to go a long way. I mean, I do have students always just amazed that I might remember them, you know, a year later, 2 years later, or they write me for a letter of recommendation, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember, how are you doing, or whatever. So I really think it does help to at least open the conversation and make them feel more comfortable. Yeah.
And that community in the classroom is so important to, especially if you're covering sensitive topics, to make sure that there's like support in that space, even if it's not going to necessarily be a space where, like safe space or whatever, to make sure that we can have these conversations, we can look after each other and ourselves, and that's not going to be um, something that we are uncomfortable doing, or there's going to be ridicule over or whatever. That's amazing. So thank you for sharing. Let me see. We find some students to be reluctant to share some of this information. If so, how do you deal with this? Yeah, some students are reluctant to share things, especially in the beginning. And I never make them share anything specific. I sort of give them general information that they can choose from to share. And sometimes they feel comfortable then after having other people share things. But if a student just wants to share who they are, where they're coming from, and their major and their minor, I will allow that. I'm never going to make somebody feel vulnerable in the classroom. There's also sometimes where you have students that have history in the classroom, and they might not be comfortable sharing things because this person went to high school with them, or turns out they used to be best friends or roommates or something, and there's something going on, and it takes a while for you to figure out what's going on with all of that stuff. So dynamics play a part into that too. They might be willing to have those conversations with you individually, or um, write about them in works that are not going to be distributed to others. But it is really hard to have big conversations and to share a lot about yourself in those spaces. And so I try to be really respectful and give people just a lot of options. And if they're just want to say, I've never thought about this before, that's enough. And I, we can come back and think about things a little bit more. But they don't have to have like particularly vulnerable revelations in front of the classroom, because sometimes that's really vulnerable and that's really hard. And we don't have to all trust each other, right off the bat. Um, but yeah, I think that it can be difficult to get people to opt into some things, but especially if you are being open and honest with your students and, sharing things about yourself, they might be more willing to do that too. Um, David had to leave. Um, Anna Mary says, I tell them on day one that I will ask them on day two of class. So yeah, they get a lot of time to then reflect and think about what they want to share. which is great. And I asked you questions at the top of the hour, right? And I said, why are you here? And some of the answers are just, I want to learn more. And we don't have to like make anybody feel bad for not having like a full reflection on like why they're going to be here, right? Sometimes we just take those answers and we say, that's great, I'm so happy you're here, and we move on, because those answers don't necessarily reflect me or reflect your interest in being in the space or how much you're going to be listening. Sometimes we just have short answers, or that we don't have the time or the space to really go into it. And I also gave you no time and no warning. Anna Mary's been here with me for a few minutes, different workshops. So there's probably an anticipation of that's what's going to be expected in the space. But yeah, students, just giving them options about what they want to share, how much they want to share, and giving them repeated options to share more about themselves throughout the semester when they're feeling secure is a great thing. Stephanie had to leave too. Okay, I have you all for 3 more minutes. I just want to have some final thoughts that I want to share. You're welcome. Sharing positionality, again, is just a way for us to connect with other people. If you're asking students to share their positionality or share things about themselves, we need to share those things too. If you're asking them questions about like sort of primary identities that we talk a lot about: gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity. First of all, we again can't make them share that stuff, but also like you have to be willing to have that conversation with them too and be open to sharing things. And again, information is super personal, so you can get them to share things about what they're studying or what their hobbies are. And that still gives us insight into who they are and what they're bringing into the classroom. It doesn't have to be all of this really heavy stuff. And approaches can still be reinforced with theories. So somebody might not want to talk about their sexuality, but they might want to say that they're really interested in queer theory. And that's another way to just identify what the perspective is, like what they're coming in with. And we want to make sure that we understand, or that we're remembering the importance of intersectionality and intersecting identities, and that we're never one thing at one time. We're a big bunch of things, and that's amazing, but it's also really, really complicated. Okay, I am going to stop the recording, and if anybody has any questions or anything that they want to share with me after I stop the recording, that's amazing. But thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it so much. It's Friday, and you're here. That's amazing.